Fridays in October in New York were always a battlefield. The honking of cars stuck on Fifth Avenue mixed with the clicking of high heels on the sidewalk and the rushed curses of office workers. Sierra Lane, 27, darted through the crowd, her hastily tied brown hair a mess, clutching her iPad like a lifeline. She was late again for an important interview, and the editor-in-chief of City Pulse, Nora No-Nonsense Baxter, had threatened to fire her if she didn't finish the Power Players Behind the City article by tonight's deadline. Just one more source, Sierra muttered, slipping past a delivery guy who nearly collided with her. She needed a big name, someone who would make her piece stand out among the dozens of bland articles about rising stars and politicians. But the last name on her list, a real estate developer named Gerald Klein, had canceled on her at the last minute with the excuse of a meeting. Sierra didn't buy it. More likely, he was afraid she'd dig too deep into his shady projects. She stopped in front of a sleek glass tower on Wall Street, the sign CrossCorp gleaming in the afternoon sun. According to a reliable source, Gerald Klein was meeting here today. If I can't interview him, maybe I can squeeze a few quotes out of someone important, Sierra told herself, smoothing out her wrinkled navy blazer. She had no invitation, no appointment, but when had a journalist ever let that stop them? Inside the lobby, the chill of air conditioning and the scent of expensive perfume hung thick in the air. The receptionist, a woman with a stiff smile, looked at Sierra like a stray cat had wandered into a banquet. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, fingers flying over the keyboard. Sierra gave her most confident smile. "Sierra Lane, City Pulse. I'm here to see Gerald Klein. He's expecting me." A bold-faced lie, but improvising was part of the job. The receptionist frowned, checking the screen. "There's no appointment with Mr. Klein today. You'll have to—" "Just tell me what floor he's on," Sierra cut in, leaning across the counter, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "I promise I won't be long." The receptionist sighed, clearly not in the mood to argue. 42nd floor, main conference room, but you'll need a pass for the elevator." Sierra winked, flashing an old press badge from a different event. "Already got one!" She rushed toward the elevators before the woman could look closer. The 42nd floor felt like another world. Polished marble floors, frosted glass doors, and a silence so heavy Sierra could hear her heartbeat. She walked down the hallway, peeking through doors, searching for any sign of Gerald Klein. At the end of the corridor, a set of double doors was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out. She heard a deep, commanding voice inside. "This is it," she whispered and pushed the door open without knocking. The conference room was massive, with a long ebony table and luxurious leather chairs. But there was no Gerald Klein. Only one man stood at the head of the table, tall, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, black hair neatly combed, and piercing icy blue eyes fixed on her as if she'd just thrown a grenade into the room. Behind him, a massive screen showed financial charts, and several high-level staff, all now silent, turned to look at her. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice low but razor-sharp. "And how did you get in here?" Sierra swallowed hard, feeling like she'd just walked into a lion's den, but she wasn't the kind to back down. "Sierra Lane, City Pulse," she said, standing tall. "I'm here to see Gerald Klein. Where is he?" The man narrowed his eyes, scanning her from head to toe, not with admiration, but as if analyzing a threat. "Gerald Klein isn't here," he said coldly, "and you just walked into a confidential CrossCorp meeting. Who let you in?" Sierra shrugged, keeping her tone calm. "The door wasn't locked. I took that as an invitation." A few staff members chuckled, but the man didn't. He stepped forward, every move radiating authority. "You're a reporter," he said, like the word itself was an insult. "Let me guess. You're digging for a scandal to land a front-page story?" Sierra crossed her arms, standing her ground. "Let me guess. You're the type of CEO who wears expensive suits and thinks he owns the world?" The room fell silent again, frozen. One staffer coughed nervously. But the man, whom Sierra now recognized as Damian Cross, CEO of CrossCorp, thanks to the nameplate on the table, just stared at her, a flicker of something in his eyes. Anger, but also curiosity. You have 10 seconds to leave, he said, his voice low and chilling, or I'll call security. Sierra smiled even as her heart pounded. 10 seconds? Generous. But I'm not going anywhere. I need a story, and you seem worth writing about. Damien tilted his head as if she'd told a joke that wasn't funny. You want a story? Here's your story. CrossCorp doesn't do business with spies posing as journalists. Get out, or I'll make sure you never set foot in this building again. Spy? Sierra scoffed, her voice sharp. I'm a journalist, not James Bond, and if you think that big boss voice of yours can scare me, you're mistaken. They stood there only a few feet apart, eyes locked like duelists. Neither flinched. Finally, Damien raised his hand and signaled for the staff to leave. Meeting adjourned, he said, without breaking eye contact. Once the room cleared, he stepped closer, his voice dropping. You want to play this game? Fine. But remember this. I don't lose. Sierra felt a jolt rush through her. Not fear, but something strange, like she just triggered something far bigger than she expected. Good, she shot back with a defiant smile, because neither do I. She turned to leave, but not before glancing back one last time. Damien Cross was still standing there, watching her, not with anger, but with something deeper, as if she had just walked into his life, and neither of them knew how much it was about to change. Sierra Lane stormed out of the CrossCorp tower, her sneakers slamming against the Wall Street pavement, as if she could stomp out the fury boiling inside her. The October wind whipped through her hastily tied brown hair, but she didn't care. In her mind, the image of Damien Cross, navy suit, ice blue eyes, and that deep, commanding voice, kept haunting her. Spy in a reporter's disguise, she muttered, mimicking his voice before scoffing. Dictator in a suit, more like it. She jumped onto the subway heading toward City Pulse's Midtown office, clutching her iPad filled with notes from the failed interview. Gerald Klein hadn't been there, and instead of a story, she'd walked straight into a clash with the most notorious CEO in New York. A man rumored to silence entire boardrooms with just one look. But Sierra wasn't afraid of him. Damien Cross might make the world tremble, but she was a journalist, and journalists didn't back down. The newsroom was its usual chaos. Phones ringing, keys clacking furiously, and the burnt smell of coffee wafting from the corner machine. Sierra collapsed into her chair, opened her laptop, and started typing like a storm unleashed. Damien Cross, the tyrant behind the glass fortress, she typed, her fingers pounding the keyboard. She wrote about CrossCorp as an impenetrable fortress, about Damien's cold stare as if he owned the souls of everyone in that boardroom. She didn't have enough material to turn the piece into a major hit, but at the very least she could get under his skin. She was halfway through describing the CEO's condescending smirk when a voice as sharp as a blade cut through the air behind her. Lane, my office, now. Sierra sighed, shut her laptop, and dragged herself into Nora Baxter's glass-walled office. The editor-in-chief, 50, with cropped silver hair and steel-piercing eyes, sat behind her desk holding a folded newspaper. Sit, Nora commanded, pointing to the chair. Sierra obeyed, feeling like a kid summoned to the principal's office. I heard you barged into CrossCorp today, Nora began, her voice calm but lethal, and had a shouting match with Damien Cross, in the middle of a closed meeting. Sierra shrugged, trying to stay cool. I didn't barge in. The door was open, and he called me a spy, so I fired back. A little. A little? Nora raised an eyebrow. You called him a suit-wearing tyrant in front of his entire executive team. Sierra stiffened. Who told you that? Doesn't matter, Nora said, tossing the paper onto her desk. What matters is that you just pissed off the man who's invested millions in the media conglomerate that owns City Pulse. Damien Cross isn't just the CEO of CrossCorp. He's one of our major shareholders. And this morning, he called and demanded you never set foot in his building again. Sierra felt the blood drain from her face. Shareholder? Damien Cross? Why didn't anyone tell me? Because you didn't ask, Nora replied dryly. And because I expected a journalist like you to do some research before walking into a minefield. But now we have a bigger issue. Cross agreed to lift the ban on one condition. Sierra narrowed her eyes. What condition? Nora slid a fax across the desk. He wants you to return to CrossCorp. He's agreed to grant you an interview if you serve as his temporary assistant for 7 days. His words, so she can understand who I really am. Sierra laughed, but the smile died when she saw Nora wasn't joking. You're kidding, right? An assistant? To that guy? I'm a journalist, not a secretary. And I'm an editor, not your mother, Nora snapped. You want to keep your job? Go back to CrossCorp, work 7 days, and bring me the interview the whole of New York will read. Or pack your desk. Your call. Sierra clenched her fists, fury crashing through her like a wave. She wanted to throw the fax in Nora's face, wanted to scream that Damian Cross didn't get to humiliate her, but she needed this job. She clawed her way up from intern to full-time reporter with blood, sweat, and caffeine. She wasn't going to let one arrogant CEO ruin that. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. 7 days, I'll do it. But I won't be fetching his coffee. Nora smiled for the first time during the entire meeting. Good. And Sierra? Don't call him a tyrant again. At least not to his face. The next afternoon, Sierra stood in front of the CrossCorp tower like a gladiator stepping into the arena. She wore a crisp white blouse, black slacks, and had her hair tied up high, ready to face Damian Cross. The same receptionist from before handed her a temporary staff badge with a look that was half sympathy, half intrigue. 42nd floor, the woman said. Mr. Cross is expecting you. The elevator ride felt like it lasted a century. When the doors opened, Sierra stepped into the familiar marble hallway, her heartbeat pounding. A young assistant with blonde hair and a hurried walk led her to a corner office. A sprawling space with windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Damian Cross sat behind his desk, dressed in a gray suit, fingers gliding across his laptop. He looked up as she entered, those icy eyes unreadable. Miss Lane, he said, voice deep like a judge handing out a sentence. Didn't think you'd come back. Sierra folded her arms and gave him a mocking smile. I'm not the quitting type, Mr. Cross. 7 days, right? I'll do the job, but don't expect me to fetch your coffee or press your suits. Damian stood, taller than she remembered, and stepped forward, stopping just a few feet from her. Good, he said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Because I don't need coffee. I need you to prove you're more than just a troublemaking journalist. For 7 days, you'll see how I run things. If you survive, you get your interview. If not, he shrugged, you know where the exit is. Sierra stared straight into his eyes, unblinking. Survive? You think I'm scared of you? I've interviewed drug lords, Mr. Cross. You're just a guy in an overpriced suit. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled her. We'll see, he said, then pointed to a small desk in the corner. Start by reading and summarizing this financial report. I need it in 2 hours. Welcome to CrossCorp, Miss Lane. Sierra sat down, biting her tongue to keep from snapping back. She watched him return to his desk, eyes already back on the screen, as if she were just another item on his to-do list. But she felt it, a spark, a challenge. Damian Cross might be the man everyone feared, but Sierra Lane wasn't everyone, and she was going to make damn sure he remembered her name. On Monday morning, Sierra Lane stepped onto the 42nd floor of CrossCorp, feeling like a gladiator walking into the Roman arena. The temporary staff badge around her neck clinked like a reminder. She was only a guest in Damian Cross's glass and steel fortress. She wore a crisp blue blouse, black slacks and flats, an outfit carefully chosen to look professional and to run if necessary. 7 days, she muttered, smoothing her hair. 7 days to survive the suit-wearing tyrant and bring home the interview of the century. Damian's office was massive, its windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, the atmosphere as cold and sterile as a laboratory. He sat behind his desk, dressed in a dark gray suit, those ice-blue eyes scanning her as she walked in. You're on time, he said, his deep voice devoid of emotion. I thought you'd quit after day 1. Sierra smiled, though she wanted to throw her badge in his face. Quit? You don't know me, Mr. Cross. Assign the task. I'm ready. Damian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement flashing in his eyes. Good, he said, pushing a thick stack of papers across the desk. These are the financial reports from 4 of CrossCorp's European branches. Summarize them, flag any inconsistencies, and present your findings at the 3 p.m. meeting. You have 5 hours. Sierra stared at the pile, her heart sinking. She was a journalist, not an accountant. But Damien's gaze, challenging, almost mocking, made her clench her fists. Fine, she said, dragging the papers toward her. But if I find anything, you owe me an answer for the interview. He smirked, a short, sharp sound. Find something first, Miss Lane. Then we'll talk. The cross-corp environment was like a battleground without bullets. Employees moved like machines, firing off emails filled with phrases like optimized deliverables and Q4 KPIs, like it was their native tongue. Sierra was given a small desk in the open office next to a soft-spoken assistant named Emily, who whispered, "No one survives more than 3 days doing Cross's tasks." Sierra just shrugged. "They're not me." The first assignment was a nightmare. Financial reports crammed with numbers, charts, and terms she barely remembered from Econ 101. But Sierra didn't fold. She opened her laptop, Googled every term, called a finance analyst friend, and took notes like a detective on a murder case. By noon, she spotted a suspicious expense in the Paris branch. $500,000 listed as strategic consulting with no attached invoice. She grinned, typed a sharp summary, and walked into the 3 p.m. meeting with the confidence of someone who just cracked the code. Damien sat at the head of the table, surrounded by tense executives. Sierra presented her findings in a clear voice, pointing to the shady entry. "I'm no expert," she said, glancing at Damien, "but $500,000 for consulting without a contract? Sounds like someone's hiding something." Silence fell. One exec coughed, pale-faced. Damien stared at her, unreadable, not angry, but something closer to reluctant acknowledgement. "Good," he said. "I'll have it investigated. What else?" Sierra slid the report across the table. "It's all there. Read it, if you can find time between being a dictator." A few execs chuckled, but shut up immediately when Damien shot them a glance. He flipped through the summary and nodded. "Not bad, Ms. Lane. Tomorrow, I need a presentation for our Japanese partners. In English, but culturally correct. 8 a.m. Sierra bit her lip to hold back a curse. She knew nothing about Japanese business culture, but Damien's expression said it all. He was waiting for her to fail. The next 7 days were relentless warfare. Damien hurled assignments at her like grenades, analyzing a 200-page legal contract, coordinating an international summit schedule, even replying to his emails in the official cross-corp tone. Read cold and emotionless. Every task was a test meant to break her. But Sierra didn't break. She hit back with sharp wit and a journalist's eye for detail. When Damien asked her to summarize a contract, she didn't just summarize. She flagged a vague clause that posed a legal risk, forcing CrossCorp's legal team to revise the draft. When he made her reply to a partner's email, she added a subtle quip that got them a smiling response. And though Damien didn't admit it, he was clearly impressed. Once, she accidentally lingered outside his office and overheard a tense call with an investor. She remembered his exact phrasing and used the same negotiation tactic with a vendor, saving CrossCorp 10 grand. By day 5, Emily whispered to her during lunch, "You're the first one who hasn't cried after a cross assignment. Are you a witch or something?" Sierra laughed. "Number, I just hate losing." But she didn't win every round. On day 6, Damien handed her an impossible task. Create a market report on Asia in 24 hours. A project fit for someone with an MBA and a death wish. Sierra worked past midnight, eyes burning, only for Damien to glance at the report in the morning and say, "Not detailed enough." He tossed it onto the desk. "Do it again." Sierra shot to her feet, rage flaring. "Again? You think I'm a damn printer? I stayed up all night for this, and all you say is, not enough? Newsflash, Damien Cross. You are not the king of the universe." He looked at her, unblinking, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Then prove you don't need me to hold your hand, Miss Lane Redowit, or walk." Sierra took a deep breath, turned on her heel, and stormed back to her desk, fueled by sheer stubbornness. She rewrote the report like a woman on a mission, like a reporter who once followed a corrupt senator across 3 states. She turned it in at the end of the day. This time, Damien just nodded. "Acceptable," he said. But for the first time, his eyes held something new, something that looked a lot like respect. Sierra Lane entered the seventh day of her seven-day war at Cross Corp with tired eyes but a blazing spirit. Over the past 6 days, she had survived Damian Cross's impossible tasks, from financial analysis to vendor negotiations, and proved she wasn't just the troublemaking journalist he once called her. Today, her final assignment was to accompany Damian to a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, where Cross Corp was sponsoring a scholarship fund. "Don't embarrass me," Damian had said that morning, his ice blue eyes sweeping over her. But Sierra swore she saw something else in them, not mockery, expectation. Now she stood in front of the mirror in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, wearing an emerald evening gown, her brown hair falling in soft waves. "I'm not his assistant," she muttered, smoothing the fabric. "I'm a journalist, and tonight I'm going to dig up a few secrets on Damian Cross." But deep down, she knew her curiosity wasn't just about the article. It was about him, the cold CEO, with his rare smile and eyes that seemed to hold a story untold, was throwing her off more than she wanted to admit. The Plaza Hotel glittered with chandelier light, filled with the sounds of violins and the rich scent of fine wine. Sierra entered the ballroom clutching her clutch like a shield, feeling like a fish among sharks. Business moguls, politicians, and TV personalities moved with the confidence of people who belonged here. At the center stood Damian, black suit tailored to perfection, power radiating from him effortlessly. He shook hands with a sponsor, his polite smile not quite reaching his eyes. When he spotted Sierra, he nodded and gestured for her to come closer. "Miss Lane," he said, voice low and smooth. "You look not bad." Sierra raised an eyebrow and offered a teasing smile. "Thanks for the half-hearted compliment, Mr. Cross. You're not bad either, if you ignore the part where you look like you'd freeze the whole room." He chuckled, a short sound, but enough to startle her. "You have a task tonight," he said, handing her a list. "Take notes on the key donors, observe who's saying what, and report back to me before the event ends. Don't mess this up." Sierra glanced at the list and bit her lip to stop a retort. "Taking notes? I'm not your secretary." "No," he replied, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You're a temporary assistant. 1 day left, Miss Lane. Don't ruin your streak." She turned on her heel, muttering something about dictators in suits, but began the task with the focus of a seasoned reporter. She moved through the crowd, listening in on conversations and jotting down notes on her phone. One elderly donor, a silver-haired woman in dazzling pearls, confided that Cross Corp had funded scholarships for hundreds of underprivileged students in the Bronx, but Damian insisted his name stay out of it. "He doesn't want anyone to know," the woman whispered, her eyes glowing. "But I know. That man has a heart. He just hides it well." Sierra froze mid-type, surprised. Damian Cross, the man she thought only cared about power and profits, secretly funding education? She looked across the room and saw him talking to a city councilman, but his eyes were distant, like his mind was somewhere else. She kept digging, casually chatting with a former Cross Corp employee who shared another story. 2 years ago, a factory worker was injured on the job. The partner company blamed the worker and threatened to sue. Damian shut down the lawsuit, paid the medical bills, and kept the man on staff. "He didn't say anything," the employee recalled. "Just told us to do the right thing. But everyone in that factory has been loyal to him ever since." What Sierra felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't even excitement over uncovering a good lead. It was confusion. Damian Cross wasn't just the cold-hearted CEO she'd imagined. He had layers, pieces she didn't yet understand. The gala stretched late into the night, the lights dimming as the orchestra played a soft piano piece. Tired from hours of observing and scribbling, Sierra slipped into a quiet corner with a glass of wine. She scanned the room looking for Damian and found him not at the center of attention, but alone in a corner near an old piano. He wasn't playing. He just sat, fingers brushing the keys like he was remembering a melody. His eyes were distant, and there was a sadness to him, something untouchable. Sierra stood, unsure what she was doing, and walked over. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Didn't know you played piano. Or is that just a prop to make you look more mysterious?" Damian looked up, startled for a moment, then his expression returned to its usual coolness. "Miss Lane," he said, "done with your observations? Or are you writing a piece on my taste in music?" She sat beside him without asking. "Not yet," she said with a faint smile. "But I'm curious. You fund scholarships, protect workers, and now sit here like a man who's lost everything. Who are you, Damian Cross? Really?" He stared at her for so long she began to wonder if she'd gone too far. Then he turned back to the piano, his fingers pressing a single low, sorrowful note. "You're a journalist," he said quietly. "You think you can dig into everything, but not every story is meant to be told." Sierra tilted her head, unflinching. "Maybe, but I think your story is worth hearing, if you'll let me." Damien didn't answer. He stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked away, leaving Sierra with the piano and a strange feeling in her chest. She watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart beating faster than usual. Damian Cross wasn't just her biggest professional challenge. He was a mystery, and for the first time, Sierra wasn't sure if she wanted to uncover him to write a story, or to truly understand the man beneath the frost. Sierra Lane sat in Damian Cross's corner office, the golden glow of Manhattan casting shifting patterns across her face through the massive windows. The 7-day stint as his temporary assistant had come to an end, and today Damian was keeping his word. An interview. But the atmosphere wasn't that of a typical interview. There was no recorder, no press presence, just Sierra, her notebook open on her lap, and Damian sitting across from her in a pale gray suit. His ice blue eyes no longer seemed sharp. They were deep now, clouded, as if hiding something he didn't want to bring to the surface. Over the past week, Sierra had seen glimpses of a different Damian, an anonymous scholarship donor, a silent protector of factory workers, a man who sat alone by a piano with sorrow etched in his gaze. But one thing remained unclear: why he despised the media so deeply. She needed to know, not just for the article, but because she wanted to understand him. "Mr. Cross," she began gently, "I've fulfilled your 7-day challenge. I think I've earned the truth. Why do you hate the media so much?" Damian froze, the tapping of his fingers on the desk ceasing. He looked at her, so long and so still that Sierra feared she'd crossed a line. Then he stood, walking slowly to the window, turning his back to her. "You don't give up, do you, Miss Lane?" His voice was low, bitter. "That's why you hired me," she replied with a faint smile. "And I'm asking not for a story. I just want to understand you." He turned back around, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. Grief. Damian returned to his seat, fingers interlaced, taking a long breath. "Fine," he said, "but don't expect me to repeat this." Sierra nodded. Her pen hovered, but she didn't write. She simply listened. "When I was in college," Damian began, his voice steady but hollow, "my mother was a human rights lawyer. She fought for people no one else would protect. But one day, Urban Voice ran a story on her, claimed she took bribes, exploited cases for personal gain. All lies, a smear campaign by a corporation she was suing. They had no evidence, but the headline was enough to destroy her." Sierra's heart clenched. She wanted to speak, but Damian's voice, now faintly trembling, held her in place. She was fired. Friends turned their backs. Charities she supported stopped returning her calls. She spiraled into depression. I stayed close, tried to help, but I was a 20-year-old kid, drowning in exams and startup dreams. I didn't see how far she'd fallen. He paused, voice thickening. A year later, she killed herself. I found her in the living room, with a note, apologizing, saying she was sorry for disappointing me. Silence. Damian stared at the floor. Sierra felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to rise, but she held them back. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I can't imagine what that was like." He gave a dry laugh, void of joy. "Don't be. I learned my lesson. The media doesn't care about the truth. They care about headlines, about what sells. After she died, I swore I'd never let them hurt anyone like that again." He looked up, his gaze harder now. "That's why I invested in Global Media Group, the parent company of City Pulse. I wanted to control it, reform it, hold it accountable. I didn't know Urban Voice had merged with City Pulse until years later. When I found out, I didn't pull my funding. I thought maybe I could change it from within. Sierra's breath caught. He didn't know. She set her pen down, pulse racing. You've done more than I ever expected, she said softly. Thank you for telling me. Damien studied her, eyes softening. You're a journalist, Miss Lane. I'm not sure I can trust you, but you're not like them. At least I hope not. The words struck her like a blade. She stood slowly and closed her notebook. I promise I won't use any of this without your permission. I need time to think. He gave a small nod. She left the office feeling like she'd walked out of a storm without an umbrella. Back in her Brooklyn apartment, Sierra opened her laptop and logged into the City Pulse archives. She typed in the headline she already half knew would exist. There it was. Human rights lawyer accused of bribery, published by Urban Voice 15 years ago, before the merger with City Pulse. She had been 12 when the article came out, still years away from even dreaming of being a journalist. And yet, there was the modern City Pulse logo sitting above the archived article. It felt like an accusation. A brand she worked for had once destroyed the most important person in Damien's life. Sierra collapsed into her chair, hands trembling. She wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to apologize, not as a representative of the press, but as herself. But revealing that she worked for the successor of Urban Voice could shatter the fragile trust between them. Trust she had spent 7 hard-earned days building. Being a journalist meant chasing the truth. But for the first time, Sierra wasn't sure if the truth was worth the price. She buried her face in her hands and whispered into the darkness, "What the hell am I supposed to do?" Sierra Lane stood in the small regional airport in Burlington, Vermont, staring through the frost-blurred windows as a snowstorm howled across the Adirondacks like a beast unleashed. The flight status board blinked red. Canceled. Inclement weather. She sighed, clutching her backpack tighter, feeling as if fate had decided to mock her. What was meant to be a simple interview with an environmental scientist for City Pulse, a distraction from the emotional whirlwind left by last week's conversation with Damien Cross, had turned into being stranded in a snow-locked airport. And standing just a few feet away, tapping on his phone with that signature cold detachment, was none other than Damien Cross himself. "You've got to be kidding me," Sierra muttered before stepping closer. "What are you doing here?" Damien looked up, his ice blue gaze flickering with surprise before settling back into practiced neutrality. "I could ask you the same, Miss Lane," he replied in that steady, unreadable tone. "I had a meeting with a partner on a clean energy initiative. And you? Digging up scandals in the snow now?" Sierra crossed her arms, masking her surprise with sarcasm. "Interviewing a scientist. Not everyone lives for drama like you, Mr. Cross." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching into the smallest smirk. A look she'd grown to recognize over their bizarre week together. "Good, because I'm in no mood to spar with a reporter today." But fate had other plans. The gate agent soon announced that no flights would be departing for at least the next 24 hours. And as luck or mischief would have it, the nearby town had only one inn left with available rooms. After a brief, tense back and forth with the receptionist about who arrived first, Sierra and Damien somehow ended up sharing the last room, a tiny, outdated space with a single double bed, a worn armchair, and a scratched-up kitchenette. "Perfect," Sierra muttered, tossing her backpack onto the armchair. "Trapped in a 10 by 10 box with a suit-wearing tyrant. Anyone want to trade lives?" Damien took off his coat, hung it neatly, and glanced at her with cool detachment. "You're welcome to sleep in the hallway. I'm not stopping you." Sierra shot him a glare but stayed quiet. The wind rattling the windows was cold enough to freeze her sarcasm. They settled into an unspoken truce, Sierra claiming the armchair with her notepad, Damien scrolling through emails from the bed. As night fell and the cold deepened, the kitchenette became their only hope for warmth. "I'll cook," Damien said abruptly, rising like he was calling a board meeting. Sierra blinked at him in disbelief as he rifled through the cabinets, producing a box of pasta, a can of tomato sauce, and a few dried herbs. "Don't look so shocked," he said without turning. "I've lived alone since I was 18. I can cook." For once, her laugh wasn't mocking. "Didn't think you knew how to do anything that didn't involve contracts or terrifying interns?" He glanced at her, a spark of amusement in his eyes. You'd be surprised, Miss Lane. They ate at the tiny table, lit by a single candle provided by the inn. The meal was simple, pasta and tomato sauce, but surprisingly good. Sierra had to admit, Damien Cross could cook. After dinner, they sat across from each other, sipping cheap red wine from mismatched mugs. Silence stretched, no longer uncomfortable. It began to melt into something gentler, something resembling a real conversation. Sierra found herself telling stories about her childhood in suburban New Jersey, stealing newspapers off neighbors' porches just to read the headlines. Her dream to be a journalist so she could speak for people who had no voice. Damien listened quietly, intently, not interrupting once. Then she turned the question on him. "What about you?" she asked softly. "Before you became this?" She gestured to the confident, powerful exterior he always wore. Damien stared into the candle flame, its glow dancing in his eyes. "I was just a kid trying to prove I wasn't worthless," he said, voice low. "After my mom died, I worked like hell to build CrossCorp, to make sure no one could crush me the way they crushed her. But sometimes I wonder if it was worth it." Her chest tightened. The confession was raw, unguarded. She wanted to tell him everything, about Urban Voice, about how City Pulse inherited that legacy. But the truth lodged in her throat like a stone. Instead, she set down her mug and leaned in slightly. "It was worth it," she said gently. "You've helped people. Those scholarships, the factory worker, even me in some twisted way. You're not worthless, Damien." He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were warm, vulnerable, aching. The space between them seemed to vanish. Then, without a word, his lips touched hers. A kiss. Light, slow, almost hesitant, like a question neither of them wanted to ask aloud. Sierra kissed him back, her hand finding his shoulder, feeling the warmth through his sweater. In that moment, there was no City Pulse, no Urban Voice, no ghosts of past betrayals. There were only two people lost in a snowstorm, finding something they hadn't expected. But when the candle burned out, Damien pulled away. His eyes returned to distance. "We shouldn't have," he murmured, standing and turning his back. "You're a journalist. I can't." Sierra felt something twist in her chest, but she forced a nod. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "Let's pretend it didn't happen." The next morning, the storm had passed, and Damien was back to his usual, unreadable self. They left the inn in silence, only the sound of snow crunching beneath their boots. As she watched him climb into a black SUV, Sierra's heart felt heavier than she expected. That kiss had crossed a line they were never supposed to blur. But even if Damien pretended it meant nothing, she knew the truth. Something had shifted, and she wasn't sure they could ever go back to what they were before. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories. Thank you very much. Sierra Lane sat alone in her small office at City Pulse, the glow from her laptop screen casting sharp light across her tired, determined face. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m., but she couldn't stop. Not yet. The article she'd written, Damien Cross, More Than a Powerhouse, had haunted her ever since that quiet kiss in the Vermont inn. Ever since Damien had told her about his mother, Margaret Cross, a human rights lawyer whose life had been destroyed by a false media smear from Urban Voice. Now every word she typed was her way of telling the world who Damien truly was, not just the cold, untouchable CEO of CrossCorp, but a man who had clawed his way through heartbreak to build something meaningful. She wrote about the anonymous scholarships he funded, the injured worker he protected, the lonely figure he became beside the piano, how he hid a wounded, noble heart behind a fortress of power. She didn't write the piece to sensationalize. It wasn't a takedown or an expose, it was a portrait. And though she omitted Urban Voice and City Pulse, knowing how deeply those names hurt him, she still felt her chest tighten every time she reread it. Because even the purest story could expose pain, and Damien had trusted her. She saved the draft and emailed it privately to Editor-in-Chief Nora Baxter with a clear note. Draft only. Do not publish until I speak to Damien. Then, exhausted, she laid her head on the desk and whispered into the dark, please let this be the right thing. The next morning, City Pulse buzzed with an unusual tension. People looked at Sierra with strange expressions, some curious, others uncomfortable. She entered the newsroom to find Nora waiting, holding a stack of papers with a grim expression. Lane, Nora said sharply, we need to talk. Now! Sierra took the papers and froze. Damien Cross, more than a powerhouse. It was her draft, unpolished, unfinished, with red highlights marking the most personal passages, especially the one about his mother. Her breath caught. Who printed this? She demanded, voice shaking. I said do not publish. It wasn't ready. Nora's face didn't soften. Doesn't matter who printed it. What matters is Damien Cross has it. He called this morning, furious, said you pretended to care just to get his story. He wants to see you. Now. Sierra's knees went weak. Somehow, maybe someone had accessed Nora's email. Maybe it was deliberate sabotage. Her draft had reached Damien. And now the man she had come to admire, maybe even love, thought she'd betrayed him. She raced to CrossCorp, heart hammering, sprinting up to the 42nd floor. Damien's office was cold, dim with the gray light pouring in from the windows. He stood behind his desk, the printed article clenched in one hand, eyes like frozen steel. Miss Lane, he said, voice low and cutting, I trusted you. I told you about my mother, about what the media did to her, and your response is this? You dig it up so the world can pick it apart all over again? You're no different than Urban Voice. Her chest tightened, tears threatening, but she held them back. Damien, no, you're wrong. I wrote this to honor you, to show the world the man who rose from pain and still chose compassion. I never meant to hurt you. I wasn't going to publish it without your permission. Damien slammed the article onto his desk, the pages fanning out like a wound split open. Honor me. You work for City Pulse, the same paper that inherited Urban Voice's legacy. You think I believe you didn't know? That those 7 days, that kiss, were just your way of earning my trust? Her voice broke. I didn't know at first, but I swear once I did, I stopped. I wrote this because I care, Damien. What happened between us wasn't fake. None of it was. But his eyes, filled with betrayal, told her it didn't matter. I can't believe a word you say, he said hoarsely. Get out. Don't come back. Sierra wanted to fight, to scream, to make him see. But the devastation in his voice told her the damage was done. So she left, every step away from that office tearing her apart. Back at City Pulse, she walked straight to her desk, pulled out a flash drive, and wrote her resignation letter. She placed both on Nora's desk. On a small note taped to the USB, she scribbled, I wrote this so the world could see who he really is, not to break him. I hope one day he understands. Then she walked out of the newsroom and into the cold chaos of New York, where the October wind and sirens couldn't drown out the pain inside her chest. She had chosen Damien, chosen his heart over the career she had dreamed of since she was a girl stealing newspapers just to read the headlines. But as she looked up at the towers of glass and steel surrounding her, she didn't know if she had just lost everything, or finally done the one thing that truly mattered. Damien Cross sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of CrossCorp, the gray October light of New York filtering through the window, casting a somber hue across his face, as if even the light wished to hide the cracks he had spent years concealing. For the first time in years, he felt out of control, not of CrossCorp, not of million-dollar deals, and certainly not of his own heart. On the desk lay a small note from City Pulse, Sierra Lane's final message. I wrote to show the world who you truly are, not to hurt you. I hope one day you'll understand. His fingers trembled as he clutched the note, as if it were the last thread tying him to something he wasn't brave enough to name. He had read those words dozens of times, each one dragging him back to that candlelit room in Vermont, where the shadows danced in her brown eyes, where their hesitant kiss made him feel, for the first time, like more than a ghost surviving pain. But then came the article draft, Damien Cross, more than a powerhouse, with lines about his mother, about the scars left by Urban Voice and the media. He'd exploded, convinced she'd betrayed him, exploited his vulnerability. He had sent her away, voice cold as ice. But now, he knew he'd been wrong. Nora Baxter, editor-in-chief of City Pulse, had called him that morning. Her voice had been sharp but laced with something rare: regret. "Sierra never intended to publish that piece without your permission," Nora had said. "She resigned right after you told her to leave. She chose you, Cross, over the dreams she's chased her whole life." The words hit him like a wave, drowning out every defense he had left. Sierra wasn't Urban Voice. She wasn't the kind of journalist who destroyed people for clicks. She had seen him, truly seen him, with all his scars, and he had pushed her away because he was afraid of trusting, afraid of losing again. Damien stood, pacing his office as the walls closed in. For 15 years, he had lived with the pain of his mother's death, bearing it under work, power, and unspoken grief. He had believed hiding was survival, masking the hole in his chest with contracts and control. But Sierra Lane, with her sharp tongue, fearless heart, and eyes like a world he secretly longed for, had shaken that foundation. And now her silence since that day, no emails, no calls, hurt more than any accusation ever could. It was emptiness, like the quiet living room where he had found his mother's body and her final apology. It was the ache of living years without daring to feel. He needed space, a place to confront the truth. He canceled all meetings and drove to his childhood home in rural Connecticut, the lakeside cottage where he and his mother had once shared quiet, golden afternoons. The house was old now, its roof moss-covered, windows fogged with memory. Inside, the scent of damp wood and aging books clung to him. He sat in the living room, the same spot where he'd found her letter, and let the silence wrap around him. And then, in that stillness, the truth bled through. He couldn't keep burying the pain. He tried to forget her, to fill the void with success and anonymous generosity. But the grief had never left. Sierra, her words, her sacrifice, had shown him a different way. To face it, to face his mother and the truth, she had done nothing wrong. She had loved him. To face himself, a man full of scars but still yearning for trust, for love. That trust, fragile like the Vermont candlelight, was Sierra's gift. She hadn't just seen the CEO. She saw the broken son, the guarded man, and chose to stay even after he pushed her away. From his mother's old desk, he took out a piece of aged stationery and a fountain pen, untouched for 15 years. He had never written a letter by hand. His world was emails and contracts. But for Sierra, he needed something real, something she could hold, the way she had once held his heart without even knowing. Slowly he wrote, "Sierra, I was wrong. I thought you were like them, the ones who took my mother, who took everything. But you're not. You saw me, not Cross Corp, not the pain, me, a man scarred, afraid, and unwilling to trust. Your article? I read it again, and I saw your heart in every word, a heart trying to tell the world that I am more than grief. I've hidden for too long, thinking forgetting was the only way. But you gave me something else, belief, that I can face it, face her, face myself. Your silence, it hurts more than anything, but I hope it's not the end. If you still want to tell my story, I'll tell it with you. And maybe, if you'll let me, we can write a new story. Ours. Damien." He folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it to her Brooklyn apartment, the address he'd found in her old City Pulse file. Standing by the lake, moonlight shimmering on the water, he felt lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for 15 years had been set down. But the fear remained, that she wouldn't answer, that this hope was just a dream. He closed his eyes and saw her smile, her eyes filled with light. And for the first time in years, Damien let himself hope. Hope that love, if faced with courage, could lead him through the dark. In Brooklyn, Sierra Lane sat in her small apartment, city lights flickering through the window like stars fallen to earth. Old newspapers were stacked beside her coffee cup, cold and forgotten. She hadn't opened her laptop since quitting, hadn't written a word. It felt like the pen inside her had dried up with her dream. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was afraid. afraid that if she wrote, she'd write about him, about Damien, his eyes like storm skies. That kiss in Vermont that made her heart beat like it never had. The way he made her believe she could be more than a reporter. She could be someone he needed. Her pain wasn't just losing her career. It was the silence. His silence. She had chosen him, given up her dream to protect his trust. But his final accusing stare at CrossCorp still haunted her. Had he ever believed her? When the doorbell rang, she startled. A mail courier handed her an envelope. The handwriting was bold but unfamiliar. She opened it, unfolded the letter, and the moment she read his name at the bottom, the tears came. Not from sorrow, but from a spark reigniting inside her. Each word was a heartbeat, each sentence a bridge back to something she hadn't dared name. He didn't just apologize. He opened up, acknowledged his pain, and invited her in. He wanted her to write with him, to face the past together, and maybe to build something new. She clutched the letter to her chest, smiling through tears, and whispered, "Okay, Damien, let's write it. And maybe, let's love too." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but the letter in her hands was a promise that pain could be faced, trust could be rebuilt, and love, even when born from all the wrong places, could still lead them to something bright. Sierra Lane stood backstage at the Waldorf Astoria ballroom, her heart pounding like it might burst from her chest. Stage lights pierced through the velvet curtains, glinting off her silver evening gown, but she didn't feel like she belonged in this dazzling world. Outside, the crowd, business moguls, philanthropists, journalists, awaited the launch of the Margaret Cross Foundation, an initiative founded by Damien Cross to support human rights attorneys and victims of media malpractice. She clutched the microphone tightly, breathing deep, her gaze drifting to her trembling hand, where she could almost still feel the warmth of Damien's fingers from all the quiet moments they'd shared in secret since his letter 2 weeks ago. That letter, with its bold but heartfelt handwriting, had pulled her out of the darkness. "I was wrong. You gave me faith, that I could face it, face her, face myself. This time, let's write it together." After that, they met at a quiet cafe in Greenwich Village, where Damien, without his usual suit, sat across from her in a soft gray sweater, his icy eyes finally warm, as if he'd let a part of his wall come down. They apologized. He for accusing her, she for not telling him about the connection between City Pulse and Urban Voice. Then they made a decision to rewrite the story, not just Damien's, but his mother's. Margaret Cross, the woman destroyed by lies because she dared to fight for justice. Their love, though still unnamed, had begun to bloom quietly. In stolen evenings over coffee, as Sierra shared tales of sneaking newspapers as a child, and Damien told stories of his mother playing piano. In long walks along the Hudson, where he held her hand like he was afraid she'd vanish. Every time their eyes met, Sierra felt a slow, steady fire, like the candlelight in that Vermont room. They weren't rushing. She helped him rebuild his faith in the press. He learned to confront his pain, little by little. Stronger than any love confession, these were acts of trust. The new article, Margaret Cross, The Legacy of Justice, was born from that trust. Sierra wrote it based on Damien's memories, stories of his mother's laughter after winning a case for a homeless man, of her teaching him Clair de Lune on the piano. But it didn't stop at memories. With Damien's help, Sierra dug into old documents, Margaret's letters to colleagues, case notes, and an email from a former client that proved the 2010 Urban Voice article was a paid smear campaign, funded by a real estate company she was suing. The article didn't just clear Margaret's name, it painted her as a symbol of integrity, a legacy Damien was continuing through CrossCorp and the foundation. Sierra stepped onto the stage. The spotlight made her blink, but she found Damien in the front row, sharp in a black suit, his blue eyes locked on hers, not with suspicion, but with unwavering belief. She raised the mic. Her voice shook slightly, but it was clear. "I'm Sierra Lane," she began, "and a few months ago I thought Damien Cross was a suit-wearing tyrant who only knew how to sign contracts and scare interns." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Damien raised a brow, lips curling into a smile only for her. Sierra smiled back, steadied herself. "But I was wrong. I rewrote this story, Not just about Damien, but about resilience. About a man who lost his mother to a media lie, but chose to turn that pain into hope. And about his mother, Margaret Cross, a human rights lawyer defamed, whose legacy will live on through this foundation and through the article we wrote together. She paused, her eyes meeting Damien's again. In that moment, the whole room faded. We wrote Margaret Cross, The Legacy of Justice together, she continued, voice catching. Through Damien's memories and the evidence we found, we showed the world that Margaret wasn't someone who took bribes. She was a woman who fought for the voiceless. Damien brought that legacy to life, and I'm honored to have been part of that story. Applause erupted, but Sierra saw only Damien. He stood, clapping, his eyes shimmering, not for the article, but for her, the woman who had given him the courage to confront his past and share what he once wanted to bury. As she stepped off stage, she handed him the mic. Their fingers brushed, warm and familiar, like the kiss in Vermont, now stronger, like an unspoken vow. Damien took the stage, thanked the audience, but his voice trembled when he mentioned his mother. Margaret Cross taught me that justice is worth fighting for, he said, eyes searching for Sierra. And Sierra Lane taught me that sometimes you have to face the pain to find hope. Thank you, Sierra, for not giving up on me. The article, published under City Pulse's Hope and Humanity section, where Sierra returned as a freelance contributor after Nora's personal invitation, became a phenomenon. Readers called it the most moving article of the year. Social media was flooded with praise, a tribute to Margaret Cross, and a song of resilience sung by her son. After the event, Sierra stood on the hotel balcony, watching the glowing Manhattan skyline. Damien joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He handed her one. You did well, Miss Lane, he said in a teasing baritone, though I still haven't forgiven you for calling me a suit-wearing tyrant. Sierra laughed, sipping her wine, but her eyes softened. I was scared, Damien, she admitted quietly. Scared I'd hurt you, like Urban Voice did. But you gave me trust, that we could tell this story, together. He set down his glass, stepped closer, and cupped her cheek gently, fingers trembling, as if afraid she'd disappear. And you gave me trust, he murmured, voice husky, eyes deep as an ocean, that I didn't have to hide the pain, that I could face it, face her, face you. I love you, Sierra. Not because you wrote the article, but because you're the only person who's ever made me want to live honestly. Her heart pounded, tears spilling even as she smiled, her signature spark still in her gaze. I love you too, Damien Cross, she whispered, even if you did almost drive me crazy with financial reports. But I guess that was the price of finding you. He laughed, pulled her into his arms, and they kissed under the New York lights. A kiss deep, certain, no longer hesitant, as if both had finally arrived at the end of a long, winding road. They stood there shoulder to shoulder, knowing their love, built on wrong doors, old wounds, and shared words, was a story worth keeping. Not just for them, but for anyone who believes in redemption and in beginning again. It was a dazzling October afternoon in Manhattan. The skyscrapers sparkled like glass flames, reflecting the blazing red of the setting sun. Inside the 42nd floor studio of Ashford Media Tower, the atmosphere was boiling over like a pressure cooker. Cameras whirred, bright white lights beamed onto the stage, and the audience's applause crashed like waves. Evelyn Moore stood backstage, her hands clutching the blue silk suit she had picked for Julian that very morning. Her heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from a sinking feeling she couldn't shake. Today was a live taping of The Spotlight, the highest-rated talk show at Ashford Media. Julian Ashford, heir to the billion-dollar media empire, was the featured guest. He sat there on a leather chair, wearing that perfect smile Evelyn once thought was reserved only for her. The gray suit he wore had been chosen by her, every stitch inspected with care. You look like you just walked out of a magazine, she had said, and he'd replied with a quick kiss on her forehead before stepping onto the stage. But now, watching him on the backstage monitor, Evelyn felt a chasm open between them. They had been secretly dating for nearly a year, hiding from curious tabloids and the scrutiny of his mother, Victoria Ashford. Julian always said he needed time to handle his family, and Evelyn believed him. She believed in the moments they held hands in his penthouse, the city lights of Manhattan glittering through the windows, and his whispered promise that she was the only one who made him feel real. "Evelyn, are you okay?" Lisa, the floor assistant, jolted her back to reality. Lisa frowned, clipboard in hand. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a little nervous," Evelyn said, forcing a smile. She smoothed her curly brown hair and tried to focus on work. As Julian's lead stylist, it was her job to ensure everything was perfect. But today, she wasn't just his stylist. She was the woman who loved him. And that made everything infinitely harder. On stage, host Dana Harper, with her golden hair and razor-sharp smile, was guiding the audience through the opening questions. "Julian, you were just named one of Forbes' most powerful CEOs under 30. What's it like to run an entire media empire at 28? Julian smiled, a dimple appearing in his left cheek. "I just try not to disappoint my mother," he said, his voice low and magnetic. The audience laughed. Evelyn smiled too. He always knew how to win people over. But then Dana leaned in, eyes gleaming like a cat playing with its prey. "Now, Julian, let's talk a little personal. There's a rumor going around that you're dating someone from your styling team, a regular girl, not from high society. Is that true?" The air in the studio turned to ice. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands trembled, the silk suit slipping from her grasp and falling to the floor. How did Dana know? Julian had promised to keep things private. He said they needed time before going public, to protect her from gossip and judgment. But now Dana's question was a bomb, and all eyes were on Julian, waiting. Julian remained seated, composed, but Evelyn saw his fingers grip the armrest tightly. She knew he hated being cornered. She silently begged him to say something, anything to protect her, to protect them. "Rumors, huh?" Julian raised an eyebrow, his smile turning cold. "I don't make a habit of dating people behind the scenes, especially the type looking to climb the ladder. My job's complicated enough as it is, Dana." The audience erupted with laughter, as if he had just delivered a brilliant punchline. Dana clapped and moved on as smoothly as a breeze. But for Evelyn, the world collapsed. Every word had been a blade to her heart. Climb the ladder, that's what he called her now. The woman he held every night, who spent hours picking ties to make him shine, was just another social climber in his eyes. She stepped back, her spine hitting the cold wall behind the curtain. Her mind spun. He didn't mean it. He's just under pressure. But reason couldn't quiet her breaking heart. She looked up at the screen and saw him still smiling, still answering questions like nothing had happened, like she didn't exist. "Evelyn, do you want to step out for some air?" Lisa's hand landed gently on her shoulder, concern in her voice. But Evelyn shook her head. She couldn't leave. She couldn't let anyone see her fall apart. She was Evelyn Moore, the woman who always held it together, always got the job done, even if her heart was in pieces. The taping ended with roaring applause. Julian stepped off the stage, waving at the crowd, his eyes never once searching for her. Evelyn stood frozen, waiting for him to come back, to explain. But then she saw Victoria Ashford emerge from the VIP hallway. With her platinum hair and Chanel dress, she walked up to Julian, placing a hand on his shoulder. She whispered something in his ear, and he nodded, his expression stony. Evelyn turned away before they could spot her. She picked up the silk suit from the floor, clutching it like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He chose them. He chose status and family over her. Her soul screamed, but not a single tear fell. Not here. Not in front of the people who only saw her as the help. She stepped out of the studio, the cold Manhattan air slapping her face. Neon lights blinked mockingly along the avenue as she stood among strangers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Julian. "Meet me at the penthouse tonight. I'll explain." She stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the delete button. But she didn't delete it. Not yet. Some part of her still hoped, still believed he hadn't meant to hurt her. But deep down she knew. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same. Welcome to Soul Stories, your home for heart-touching tales of love, hope, and second chances. If you believe in the power of kindness and the magic of unexpected connections, Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing family. Rain poured over the streets of Manhattan, turning sidewalks into rivers that shimmered with neon lights. Evelyn stood under the awning of a small cafe, a black umbrella shielding her pale face. It had been 3 weeks since that fateful talk show, and with each passing day, she felt herself slowly unraveling. Julian's penthouse, once a place she thought of as safe, was now just a distant luxury. That night, he apologized. He said he had no choice, that Dana had cornered him live on air. "You know I never meant to hurt you," he had said, his amber eyes pleading with hers. But that apology wasn't enough to mend her heart. Evelyn tried. She returned to work, still picking out Julian's suits and ties, still smiling at her colleagues at Ashford Media. But every time she looked at him, all she could hear was that word, social climber. It echoed in her mind like a broken song on repeat. Then this morning, a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines changed everything. She had sat on the bathroom floor of her tiny rental apartment in the Lower East Side, her hands trembling as she held the test. Pregnant. The word repeated itself in her mind, both magical and terrifying. She placed a hand on her belly, imagining a tiny life forming inside. Not just one life. The doctor later confirmed it. Twins, 2 babies, 2 new lives, hers and Julian's. "He needs to know," Evelyn whispered to her reflection in the mirror, her eyes red and swollen. Her heart still ached, but she couldn't keep this from him. The children deserved a father. And maybe, just maybe, this would change Julian. She gathered her courage and sent him a message. "Julian, I need to see you. It's important." But the message only showed as sent. No reply. The next day she went to Ashford Media Tower, determined to speak to him face to face. But as she stepped into the lobby, a man in a black suit and sunglasses stopped her. "Ms. Moore, I'm Robert Klein, legal counsel for the Ashford family," he said, his voice cold as steel. "You should know that any attempt to spread rumors or cause disruption will have serious legal consequences." Evelyn froze. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need to speak to Julian." Klein curled his lips slightly and handed her a business card. "If you have anything to say, contact me. But let me give you some advice. Don't try to extort money or status from the Ashfords. We don't tolerate that." She walked out of the building, her legs heavy as lead. On the way home, she tried calling Julian again, but her number had been blocked. She emailed him, only to receive an automated reply. "This address is no longer accepting messages." Every door to him had been slammed shut. That night, she lay on her bed, staring at the stained ceiling of her cramped apartment. "They think I'm a gold digger. They think she would use her pregnancy to trap Julian." The thought sliced through her. She remembered the look in Victoria Ashford's eyes that day in the VIP hallway. Cold, calculating, powerful. Evelyn knew that if she stayed, if she fought back, her children would grow up in a world of lies and pressure, pawns in the Ashfords' game. "No," she said aloud, sitting upright. "I won't let my babies live like that." She placed her hands on her belly, a new resolve forming within her. She would protect them, even if it meant leaving everything behind. 2 months later, Evelyn stood at Penn Station, an old suitcase beside her. She had sold almost all of her belongings, ended her lease, and resigned from Ashford Media with a brief email. Her small savings were just enough to start over in a new place. Brook Hollow, a tiny town in Vermont she had once read about in an article titled, "The Most Peaceful Places in America." She had no family to lean on, no close friends left in Manhattan to help, but she had herself, and now she had 2 lives growing inside her. The train arrived, its whistle piercing the frigid air. Evelyn stepped on board without looking back. The skyscrapers and dazzling lights of Manhattan faded into the distance. She sat by the window, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass, one hand on her belly as if cradling the whole world. Brook Hollow welcomed her with a gentle winter morning. The small town nestled among snow-covered hills, its white-painted wooden houses puffing soft smoke from brick chimneys. Evelyn rented a modest apartment above a bakery where the air was laced with the scent of flour and cinnamon every morning. She started over, one quiet step at a time. She bought an old sewing machine, began mending clothes for the townspeople, and enrolled in Vermont's state health insurance program. By spring, her belly had rounded noticeably. She gave birth to two boys, Liam and Lucas, at the county's small hospital. Liam arrived first, crying loudly as if to announce himself to the world. Lucas followed, smaller and quieter, gripping her finger as if to say everything would be all right. Looking into their amber eyes, just like Julian's, Evelyn felt both joy and sorrow. She named them after dreams, Liam meaning protector, and Lucas meaning light. "Mommy's going to give you a good life," she whispered, holding them close. "Just the three of us." She never mentioned Julian to anyone in Brook Hollow. When the bakery owner asked about the children's father, Evelyn simply smiled and said, "He's not in the picture." And slowly she learned to lock away the past, like sealing a dusty old trunk in the far corner of her soul. Manhattan, Ashford Media, and the man who once promised to love her forever were now just a distant dream. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm rays across the worn wooden floor of Evelyn's small sewing shop in Brook Hollow. She sat at her sewing machine, fingers deftly threading the needle through cotton fabric, altering an evening gown for Mrs. Henderson, the town's florist. The scent of coffee drifted up from the bakery downstairs, mingling with the chirping of sparrows outside the porch. It had been 5 years since Evelyn left Manhattan, carrying two tiny lives inside her. Now, Brook Hollow was home, a place where past pain had faded like a passing breeze. On the corner of her desk, two crayon drawings were taped with care, one titled Mom and Liam and Lucas, with 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun, and the other, Super Liam, showed a caped boy flying through a starry sky. Evelyn smiled, her heart warm. Liam and Lucas, her 4-year-old twin boys, were the light that guided her through the darkest days. "Lucas, be careful with that colored pencil," Evelyn called without looking up. Lucas, with curly brown hair and bright amber eyes, sat in the corner, coloring a paper kite. He was the quieter of the two, dreamy and artistic. "I will, Mommy," Lucas replied softly, setting the pencil down with care. Meanwhile, Liam, energetic like a tiny whirlwind, was running around with a plastic ball. "Mommy, will you play soccer with me this afternoon?" he shouted, knocking over a spool of thread in the process. Evelyn paused her stitching and raised an eyebrow. "Liam, if you knock over one more spool, I'll turn you into Super Mop Boy." Liam burst out laughing, his left cheek dimple showing, a feature Evelyn tried not to think too much about. She stood, picked up the thread, and pulled Liam into her arms, tickling him until they were both giggling uncontrollably. Lucas glanced over with a shy smile, then returned to his kite. These simple, love-filled moments were why she fought every single day. Evelyn wasn't just a single mom, she was part of the Brook Hollow community. 5 years ago, she had opened her little sewing shop, using her former skills as a stylist to tailor and design clothes. She also taught a free crafts class every Saturday for the town's children, guiding them in making kites, bracelets, and rag puppets. The townspeople adored her. Mrs. Henderson often brought her cookies, saying she sewed dresses better than the boutiques in Burlington. Mr. Tom, the bookstore owner, liked to joke, "Evelyn, if you start a sewing class for adults, I'm your first student." Their encouragement made her blush, but also made her proud. She had built a life from nothing, relying on no one but herself. But being a single mother was never easy. There were nights she lay awake, worrying about rent or medical bills. Days when both boys were sick and she ran herself ragged between the clinic and the shop. But she never let her son see her falter. "Mommy's your superhero," she often told them, and they believed it, their eyes shining as they hugged her tight. Today was Saturday, and her crafts class was busier than usual. 8 kids sat around the long table in the community center, laughing and sticking glue everywhere. Liam stood on his chair, holding up his dragon-shaped kite. "Mom, mine's gonna fly the highest, right?" Lucas, sitting beside him, shook his head. "Mine's prettier, Liam. Your dragon looks weird." Evelyn laughed, placing a hand on both of their shoulders. "Both kites are amazing. What matters is how hard you tried." She moved around the table, helping a little girl tie her kite string, and was about to return when Liam asked a question, his voice curious. "Mommy, does our dad know how to draw kites?" The room didn't fall silent, but Evelyn's heart did. This wasn't the first time. Liam and Lucas, with the natural curiosity of 4-year-olds, often asked about their father, and each time it pierced her. She knelt, facing Liam's amber eyes that mirrored Julian's far too closely. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said gently. "Your daddy, he hurt Mommy a lot, but I have you too, and that's the best thing that's ever happened to me." Liam nodded, but his eyes held questions that hadn't been answered. Lucas, ever quiet, reached for her hand, as if to comfort her. Evelyn smiled, tousled their hair, and changed the subject. "Now, who wants to try flying kites in the park this afternoon?" That afternoon, Brook Hollow Park glowed in autumn colors. Red and gold leaves drifted down, blanketing the grass like a soft rug. Evelyn stood among the children, helping each one launch their kite. Liam darted ahead, squealing as his dragon kite soared, though a bit tilted from pulling too hard. Lucas walked calmly behind, holding his kite string tight, his eyes following the sparrow-shaped kite he had colored earlier. "Mommy, look!" Lucas called, laughing loudly for the first time all day. Mrs. Henderson, strolling nearby, waved cheerfully. "Evelyn, the kids look so happy. You're a treasure to this town." Evelyn blushed, murmured thanks, then turned to help another girl with her tangled string. In that moment, she felt peace. She had done it. She had given Liam and Lucas a full life, even without a father's presence. She taught them independence, how to hold a spoon, fold laundry, and kindness, like saying sorry when they were wrong or sharing cookies with friends. She also taught them to avoid the world she once knew, the world of the powerful where words could cut sharper than knives. But deep down, Evelyn knew she couldn't hide the past forever. One day, Liam and Lucas would want answers. They would ask why she left Manhattan, why she never spoke of their father. And when that day came, she would have to face the memory of Julian Ashford, the man who had once meant everything and then taken everything away. As the sun began to set, Evelyn walked home with her boys, each one holding a hand. Liam sang a silly superhero song, while Lucas told her about a bird he'd seen in the park. She listened, smiling, but in her heart she whispered a quiet promise. "No matter what comes, I will protect my children." Autumn in Brook Hollow burst into life with vibrant colors. The town's central park, usually quiet with a few morning joggers, buzzed with laughter and the scent of warm apple pie. Brook Hollow Preschool was hosting its annual fundraiser, complete with game booths, handmade crafts, and a small stage where the children performed. Evelyn Moore stood at her stall, arranging hand-sewn fabric bracelets and tote bags, her hands busy while her eyes kept track of Liam and Lucas. "Mommy, can I have one more cookie?" Liam asked, crumbs still clinging to his lips, his amber eyes sparkling. Clad in a red jacket, he darted around the booth like a little bee. Lucas, seated beside Evelyn, neatly arranged the bags and shook his head at his brother. "Liam, you already had 3. Mommy said only 2. Evelyn laughed, patting Lucas's head. "Thank you for remembering, sweetheart. Liam, if you want another cookie, you've got to help me sell 1 bracelet first. Deal?" Liam nodded eagerly and immediately shouted at a passing elderly woman, "Ma'am, buy my mommy's bracelet. It's really pretty." The woman chuckled and bought 2, making Evelyn blush with her son's enthusiastic sales pitch. The event bustled with cheerful folk music, chattering parents, and colorful booths. Mrs. Henderson, the florist, brought over a basket of chrysanthemums to decorate Evelyn's stall. "You've made this spot look like a county fair, Evelyn," she praised warmly. Evelyn smiled and thanked her. She loved Brook Hollow for moments like these, where everyone treated each other like family. Amid the crowd, a small crew from Small Town Heroes, a reality show spotlighting tight-knit communities, arrived with cameras and microphones. They had been invited to film the event for a promotional segment about Brook Hollow. Evelyn hesitated when the camera pointed her way, but eventually agreed to a brief interview. "I'm Evelyn Moore, a single mother to Liam and Lucas," she said softly but confidently. "I run a sewing shop and teach crafts to the kids here. Brook Hollow is home. It's where I found peace." Liam and Lucas, curious about the camera, ran over. Liam held up a bracelet, grinning wide. "My mom made this. You should buy one." Lucas, more reserved, held Evelyn's hand, but smiled when the cameraman complimented his gemstone eyes. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Evelyn hugged both boys, her heart brimming with pride. What she didn't know was that this moment, captured by a lens, would change everything. 2 weeks later in Manhattan, Julian Ashford sat in the penthouse office of Ashford Media Tower. The city lights sparkled beyond the glass walls, but he barely noticed. On his screen was an email from his assistant titled, "Must See Clip from Vermont." Julian frowned, ready to delete it. He had no time for fluff between financial reports and back-to-back meetings, but the subject line, "Small Town Heroes," piqued his curiosity. He hit play just to kill a few minutes. The video opened with a sweeping shot of Brook Hollow Park blanketed in autumn leaves, children laughing, and a warm narrator's voice. Today we visit Brook Hollow, Vermont, a town where community thrives in the simplest things. The camera panned over cheerful booths and stopped on a woman with curly brown hair and a soft smile. "I'm Evelyn Moore, a single mother to Liam and Lucas," she said, her voice like a ghost from a distant past. Julian froze. Evelyn, her name, her voice. It cut through 5 years of silence like a blade. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. She looked different. Not the timid stylist hiding backstage at Ashford Media, but a strong, confident woman. But what stole his breath were the two boys beside her. Liam, beaming with a bracelet in hand and a deep dimple in his left cheek, shouted something gleefully into the camera. Lucas, quieter, stood close to Evelyn, his amber eyes looking straight into the lens. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. Those eyes, that dimple. It was like looking into a mirror of his childhood. He rewound the video, pausing on the boys' faces. His heart thudded violently. No, it can't be. He shook his head, grasping for a rational explanation. But every detail, from Liam's grin to the way Lucas tilted his head, fit too perfectly. He pulled open a drawer and took out an old photograph. Him and Evelyn, snapped during a rare carefree moment in Central Park, when she used to smile at him like he was her entire world. He looked from the photo to the video screen, and the truth slammed into his chest like a punch. "Evelyn," he whispered hoarsely. She had vanished 5 years ago. No goodbye, no trail. He thought she left out of anger, because of that stupid thing he said on national TV. He'd searched for her, but his mother, Victoria, insisted she was just a gold digger who ran when she didn't get what she wanted. And Julian had believed it, or at least forced himself to, just to survive the ache. But now, staring at those boys, he knew he'd been wrong. So terribly, unforgivably wrong. He shot to his feet, pacing the office in a storm of fury, guilt, and disbelief. She was pregnant. She had my children, and I didn't know. Anger flared, at himself, at the system, at the walls he'd allowed his mother and legal team to build. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she fight to reach me? Then he remembered. The family lawyer, the blocked calls, the rejected emails. He'd let them erase her from his life, and now the cost was 2 children he'd never known existed. Julian dropped back into his chair, opened his laptop, and typed, "Evelyn Moore, Brook Hollow." The video popped up on X, with thousands of shares and comments. "What an amazing mom! Adorable twins!" He clicked a post that read, "Evelyn Moore, single mom raising well-mannered twin boys in Brook Hollow, Vermont." The word twins made his chest tighten. He had to act. He grabbed his phone and called his assistant. "Book me a flight to Brook Hollow," he ordered. "Tomorrow." His voice was firm, but inside he trembled. He had to see Evelyn. He had to meet those boys. And he needed answers, no matter what it would cost. Brook Hollow glowed under the soft light of early winter, the wooden rooftops glazed with a delicate layer of frost. Evelyn Moore stood inside her sewing shop, absently gazing out the window. Liam and Lucas were at preschool, and she was using the quiet morning to finish a wool coat for Mr. Tom, the town's bookseller. But her heart wasn't still. Ever since the fundraiser 2 weeks ago, she'd felt a strange tension, like the past was lurking just beyond the walls of the life she had so carefully rebuilt. The chime of the doorbell snapped her back. She looked up, ready to greet a customer with her usual smile, but that smile froze the instant she saw who walked in. Julian Ashford. Dressed in a simple gray suit, he still exuded quiet authority. His amber eyes locked on hers, and for a moment, time stood still. He looked different. his hair shorter, his face more angular. But he was still Julian, the man who once shattered her heart. "Evelyn," he said, his voice deep, laced with a mix of pain and restrained anger. "We need to talk." Evelyn gripped the coat in her hands, suddenly feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath her. "What are you doing here, Julian?" Her voice was cold, but inside she trembled. She had imagined this moment for 5 years, but now that it was real, she had no idea what to do. "I saw the video," Julian said as he stepped forward, eyes never leaving hers. "Small-town heroes. 2 boys, Liam and Lucas. They're mine, aren't they?" The question hit her like a punch to the chest. She stepped back, her spine pressing against the sewing table, hands clutching the edge to steady herself. "You have no right to ask me that," she snapped. "Not after what you did." Julian's brow furrowed, his face darkening. "What I did? Evelyn, you disappeared. Without a word, no trace. And now I find out I have 2 children. Through a video. Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Tell you? After you called me a gold digger on national television? You think I'd show up pregnant on your doorstep and beg you to acknowledge me?" She stepped forward, pointing at him. "I tried, Julian. I texted, called, emailed. But you, or more precisely, your legal team, blocked me. They threatened to sue me if I said anything. You really expected me to drag my children into that world?" Julian stood frozen, as if slapped. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He remembered the months after Evelyn left, how his mother, Victoria, had insisted she was nothing but trouble. He had let his team handle it, never questioning the details. And now, standing in front of Evelyn, he realized just how horribly he had failed her. "Evelyn, he faltered, his voice rough. "I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know they'd done that." "Not knowing isn't an apology," Evelyn said sharply, turning away so he wouldn't see the tears welling in her eyes. "What do you want, Julian? Why are you here?" "I want to meet them," he said, firmer now. "Liam and Lucas. I want to know my sons." Evelyn shook her head, voice trembling. You don't get to waltz in and be part of their lives just because you're suddenly curious. They don't need you. They have me, and they're happy." The tension between them tightened like a string pulled to the breaking point. But before Julian could respond, the doorbell chimed again. Liam and Lucas came bursting in, jackets muddy, faces glowing. "Mommy, I drew a dinosaur today," Liam shouted, waving a paper smeared with crayon. Lucas, quieter, clung to Evelyn's leg, eyes turning curiously toward Julian. Julian stood motionless, staring at the boys. Liam, with his dazzling smile and unmistakable dimple. Lucas, with his thoughtful gaze and familiar amber eyes. Julian's chest ached, a mixture of wonder and heartbreak. "Who's that, Mommy?" Lucas asked softly, still clutching Evelyn's coat. Evelyn inhaled deeply, trying to steady her voice. "He's an old friend of mine. He's just visiting." She turned to Julian with a warning in her eyes. "Right?" Julian understood. He knelt down, face level with the boys, forcing a smile. "Hi there. I'm Julian. That's a really cool dinosaur you drew," he said to Liam, then turned to Lucas. "What do you like to draw?" Lucas tilted his head, thoughtful. "Sparrows, they fly high." Liam chimed in. "But dinosaurs are stronger, right, Mr. Julian?" Julian chuckled, a genuine warm sound he didn't know he still had. "Dinosaurs are strong, but sparrows are special too. Both are amazing." The boys laughed, clearly intrigued by the new stranger. Evelyn stood still, heart in turmoil. She wanted to send Julian away, to protect her sons. But watching the way he spoke to them, she couldn't deny the truth. He was their father, whether she wanted him to be or not. "All right, boys, go wash your hands," she said, her tone firmer than she intended. "Mommy needs to talk to Mr. Julian." The twins nodded and ran into the back room, leaving behind a heavy silence. Evelyn turned to Julian, her voice lowered. "Listen to me. I don't want them knowing who you are. Not now. They're too young, and I won't let you turn their lives upside down just because you decided to show up." Julian nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed resistance. "I understand, but I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn. I want to be part of their lives, and yours, if you'll let me." She shook her head and walked to the door, opening it. Leave, Julian. Go back to Manhattan. Back to your world. We don't belong in it. Julian looked at her, pain flashing across his face. But he didn't argue. He stepped out into the cold Brook Hollow air. As the door shut behind him, he stood on the sidewalk, staring through the window of the sewing shop. Inside, Evelyn turned away, hugging her arms around herself as if holding everything together. Julian clenched his fists. He knew he couldn't force his way back in, but he also knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when he had just found the two pieces of himself he never knew were missing. And the woman he had never truly stopped loving. Brook Hollow was cloaked in a soft winter mist, the cobblestone streets glimmering under the streetlights. Julian Ashford stood before a small rental house on the edge of town, a single suitcase in hand. He had left Manhattan 3 days earlier, not with assistance or luxury cars, but with a rented SUV and a resolve that couldn't be shaken. He knew he couldn't force Evelyn's forgiveness, but after seeing Liam and Lucas, two little boys who bore his face, he also knew he couldn't go back to the life he once knew. After their tense confrontation in the sewing shop, Evelyn had reluctantly agreed to a compromise. You can stay in Brook Hollow, she had said, her voice like steel, but only as a family acquaintance. You will not tell Liam and Lucas that you're their father. If you do anything to hurt them, I swear, Julian, you'll regret it. He had nodded, accepting her terms, even as his heart ached with the urge to hold his sons and call them his. Today would be his first official visit with Liam and Lucas. Evelyn had invited him to the park, where she usually took the boys to play soccer on Saturday afternoons. Julian stood at the edge of the field, dressed in a simple wool coat instead of his usual suits, feeling oddly out of place among the small-town families. He spotted Evelyn first, kneeling to tie Lucas's shoelaces, her curly brown hair pulled into a high ponytail. Liam zipped across the grass, kicking a plastic soccer ball and yelling, "Mommy, come play with me!" When Evelyn looked up and saw Julian, she gave a curt nod, a reluctant invitation. "Liam, Lucas," she called out, "Mr. Julian is joining us today." Liam ran over, eyes wide with curiosity. "You're the guy who likes dinosaurs, right?" he asked, referencing their brief exchange in the sewing shop. Julian smiled and crouched to the boy's level. "That's me, but I heard you're way better at soccer than I am." "I'm super good," Liam declared, grabbing Julian's hand and dragging him onto the field. Lucas, more reserved, held on to Evelyn's hand, his amber eyes watching Julian with interest. "You want to try too, Lucas?" Julian asked gently. Lucas shook his head at first, but with a small, encouraging nod from Evelyn, he eventually took a few slow steps toward them. Julian had never played soccer with kids. In Manhattan, his life revolved around meetings and glamorous events. But here, under the pale sunlight of Brook Hollow, he found himself laughing as Liam tried to dribble the ball past him, and Lucas, though clumsy, joined in with a shy smile. "Mr. Julian, you're too slow," Liam teased, prompting Julian to dramatically fall onto the grass. The boys burst into laughter, their joy infectious. Evelyn stood a few yards away, arms folded across her chest, watching silently. She wanted to keep her distance, to hold on to her anger, but watching Julian roll in the grass with her sons, she couldn't deny he was trying. That didn't erase the past, though. Her mind flashed to that moment, the words "social climber" broadcasted to millions. She turned away, pretending to check her purse, hiding the swirl of emotions inside her. That evening, Julian was invited to Evelyn's apartment, a cozy space above the bakery. The wooden dining table was laid with freshly baked bread and her homemade potato soup. Liam and Lucas sat across from Julian, chattering about preschool with the boundless energy only 4-year-olds could muster. "My teacher said I drew the best dinosaur in class," Liam announced proudly. Lucas, curled up in his chair, added shyly, "I drew a sparrow. She liked it too." Julian listened attentively, nodding and asking gentle questions. "What kind of dinosaur did you draw? Do sparrows fly fast?" To his own surprise, he found himself genuinely fascinated by their answers. When Lucas handed him a crayon drawing, Julian felt his heart melt. "This is my son," he thought, but said nothing, honoring Evelyn's boundary. After dinner, Evelyn allowed him to read the boys their bedtime story. He settled into the armchair while Liam and Lucas curled up on the sofa, eyes glowing with excitement as he read The Little Dinosaur That Could. His voice was calm and warm, carefully pacing each word. When Liam yawned and leaned against his arm, Julian had to resist the urge to wrap him in a tight hug. From the kitchen, Evelyn washed the dishes, her ears catching every word. She didn't want to admit it, but Julian was better at this than she'd expected. There was no arrogance, no pretense. Just a man, trying to connect with two boys he barely knew. And that terrified her. In the days that followed, Julian quietly became part of Brook Hollow. He signed a longer lease on the little house, bought a used bicycle, and started showing up at places Evelyn and the boys frequented. He helped Mr. Tom organize books at the bookstore, chatted with Mrs. Henderson about chrysanthemums, and even attended a preschool parent meeting as just a friend of Ms. Moore. The townspeople were curious about the stranger from the city, but they began warming to him. He didn't flaunt his wealth or name. He lived simply, earnestly. One afternoon, Julian brought a Lego set to the park, where he and the boys built a castle together. Liam stacked blocks with enthusiasm, while Lucas carefully arranged the colors. "Mr. Julian, are you going to stay here forever?" Liam asked, voice sweet and innocent. Julian glanced over at Evelyn, who sat on a bench nearby, and answered, "I hope so, Liam." She heard him but said nothing. She couldn't deny the boys were growing fond of him, and she couldn't ignore that he was trying, really trying. But every time she looked at him, memories of cold lawyers, veiled threats, and the agony of 5 years alone resurfaced. Was she protecting them, or robbing them of the chance to have a father? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Julian stood and brushed the grass from his pants. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said, voice low but sincere, "for giving me this chance." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't make me regret it, Julian." He offered a faint, bittersweet smile before turning to leave. Evelyn watched him go, her heart heavy with things she couldn't say. What she didn't know was that within days a storm from the past would arrive, one powerful enough to shatter this fragile peace they were just beginning to build. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories. Thank you very much. Brook Hollow awoke to a frigid winter morning, the condensation on Evelyn Moore's sewing shop windows streaking like faded tears. She stood behind the counter, stitching a scarf for Mrs. Henderson, though her mind was far from the rhythmic movement of needle and thread. For the past 2 weeks, Julian had become a regular presence in Liam and Lucas's lives, even if only as Mr. Julian. He played soccer with them, built Lego castles, and even fumbled through baking cookies under Liam's amused instruction. Evelyn watched from a distance, her heart torn between lingering fears and an unspoken warmth she wasn't ready to name. That fragile peace shattered at midday. Mrs. Henderson rushed into the shop, her usual sunny expression replaced with worry. "Evelyn, have you seen the news?" she asked, holding out her phone. The screen displayed a sensational headline from Starscope. "Billionaire Julian Ashford abandoned his sons for 5 years?" Below it, a photo taken from a distance. Julian playing soccer in the park with Liam and Lucas, all three laughing, blissfully unaware of the lurking paparazzi. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She scrolled through the article, each word slicing deeper. Sources confirm that Julian Ashford, heir to the Ashford media empire, has twin sons with a single mother in Vermont. The woman, a former stylist he once publicly humiliated on national television, has been raising the boys in secret for 5 years. The article even quoted Julian's infamous line, "I don't make a habit of dating people backstage, especially the type who climb ladders." "How did they even find out?" Evelyn whispered, her hand trembling. She looked at Mrs. Henderson, trying to stay composed. "Thank you for telling me. I need to make a call." Mrs. Henderson nodded, gently squeezed Evelyn's shoulder, and left. Evelyn locked the shop, sat down, and checked X on her phone. The hashtag #sign Julian Ashford was trending at number 3, flooded with thousands of posts. Some bashed Julian, another rich man shirking responsibility. Others attacked Evelyn. She hid the kids for 5 years. Now she wants a payout? She shut the phone off, tears blurring her vision. Liam and Lucas can't see this. They can't get hurt the way I once was. At his rented house on the edge of town, Julian was also reeling. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Assistants, lawyers, and his mother, Victoria Ashford. He opened his laptop and stared at the Starscope article, fury boiling in his chest. Someone had followed him, snapped photos of his most cherished moment, and turned it into a tabloid scandal. He called Ashford Media's PR team, demanding a full investigation into the leak. But he knew how this worked. Once the tabloids smelled blood, they didn't stop. A knock at the door. Julian opened it and froze. Evelyn stood there, her eyes swollen from crying, but burning with fury. "How could you let this happen, Julian?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You said you wanted to protect them. And now the whole world knows about our sons. They're calling me a gold digger, and my boys." She choked on the words. "Evelyn, I'm sorry," Julian said, stepping toward her, but she held up her hand to stop him. "You didn't know?" she scoffed. "Like you didn't know 5 years ago when you threw me under the bus? I built a safe life for Liam and Lucas, and now you've dragged your cruel world into ours." Before he could reply, his phone rang. He glanced down. "Mom." He hesitated, but Evelyn's voice was cold. "Answer it. I want to hear what she has to say." He put the call on speaker. Victoria Ashford's voice cut like glass through the room. "Julian, what the hell are you doing in that backwater town? The company stock dropped 10% this morning because of that article. That woman, Evelyn Moore, she clearly trapped you. Come back to Manhattan. We'll sue her for defamation." Evelyn clenched her fists, but before she could speak, Julian snapped. "Enough, Mother." His voice was hard. "Evelyn didn't trap me. Liam and Lucas are my sons, and I won't let anyone, including you, hurt them. I'll handle this, but not your way." He hung up and looked at Evelyn. "She won't interfere again. I promise you." Evelyn's eyes wavered. A part of her wanted to believe him, but a louder part just wanted to run. "I need time, Julian," she said, her voice small. "I don't want my children caught in the crossfire between you and your family. I'm thinking of leaving Brook Hollow." Julian was stunned. "Leave? Evelyn, you can't. The boys need you. And me. I know I messed up, but I'm trying to fix it. Don't take them away from me again." She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "This isn't about you, Julian. It's about them. I've seen what your world does to people. It nearly broke me. I won't let it break them." She turned and walked out, leaving Julian in the silence of his rental home. He clenched his fists, helplessness rising in his chest. He couldn't force her to stay, but he couldn't lose them. Not again. He grabbed his phone and called his PR director. "Set up a press conference," he said, his voice unshakable. "I'm going to tell the truth. It's time I take responsibility." That night, Evelyn sat in the living room, Liam and Lucas fast asleep on the couch, each holding a stuffed animal. She stared at them, heart aching. 5 years ago, she'd left Manhattan to protect them, and now she was ready to do it again. But as she brushed a strand of hair from Lucas's forehead, he mumbled in his sleep, "Mr. Julian tells good stories." Evelyn froze. A tear slipped down her cheek. Whether she admitted it or not, Julian had become part of their lives. She opened her laptop, reread the Starscope article, and scrolled through the comments on X. Amid the criticism, there were voices of support. She raised 2 boys on her own. That's strength. If Julian really abandoned them, he should apologize. She closed the laptop and buried her face in her hands. Should I give him a chance, she wondered. I don't know. But she knew one thing. If she left now, she'd be shattering the only world Liam and Lucas had ever known. Again. She stood, gazing out the window as snow began to fall over Brook Hollow, painting the quiet town white. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. Just one more chance, Julian. Don't make me regret it. Chapter 8. A Public Apology. Manhattan shimmered beneath neon lights, but inside the press room at Ashford Media Tower, the air was heavy, thick with anticipation, like the moment before a storm. Dozens of reporters crammed into the space, camera flashes blinking in rapid succession. Hushed murmurs building as Julian Ashford stepped onto the stage. Gone was the tailored suit and polished air. Instead, he wore a simple navy sweater. His amber eyes scanned the crowd without flinching, though his heart pounded like it was trying to break free from his chest. It had been 3 days since Starscope's article rocked Brook Hollow. Julian had worked tirelessly with his PR team to prepare for this moment. He knew this wasn't just a press conference. It was a chance to correct a massive wrong, to protect Liam, Lucas, and Evelyn from the lies and cruelty of the media. But more than anything, this was the apology he owed her, 5 years overdue. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low but steady, "I'm here today to address the recent allegations concerning myself and 2 young boys in Brook Hollow, Vermont." He paused, inhaling deeply. "Liam and Lucas are my sons, and Evelyn Moore, their mother, is a woman I hurt deeply 5 years ago." The room stirred, reporters whispering, pens flying, recorders lifted. Julian raised a hand to quiet them. "5 years ago on national television, I denied my relationship with Evelyn and called her a social climber. That was a lie, a cowardly, calculated lie, born from family pressure and fear of public image. The truth is, I loved her. She was the only person who ever saw me for who I really am. Not for my name, my money, or my legacy. And I betrayed her trust. Because of that, I lost 4 years of being a father." His gaze turned to the nearest camera, as though he were speaking directly to Evelyn through the lens. "Evelyn, if you're watching, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I let my family drive you away. I didn't know you were pregnant, but that's not an excuse. I should have searched harder. I should have fought for you. I was wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life making it right." The room fell silent. Only the hum of cameras remained. A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Ashford, why now? Is this just damage control after the backlash?" Julian shook his head. "I'm speaking now because my sons deserve a father who takes responsibility, and Evelyn deserves respect, not to be smeared by gossip and lies." He ended with a promise. "I'll do everything I can to protect my family, even if that means stepping away from Ashford Media. Thank you." Without taking further questions, he stepped down from the podium and walked out, leaving behind a media frenzy and a tidal wave of reactions on social media. Back in Brook Hollow, Evelyn sat on the couch in her small living room, eyes locked on the flickering image of Julian on her old TV. Liam and Lucas played with wooden blocks in the corner, unaware that their world had just shifted. When Julian said, "I loved her," Evelyn's chest tightened. She hugged a pillow to her chest, trying to hold back tears. His apology was heartfelt, raw, and real, but it also unearthed the pain she had buried so deeply. "He says he loves me, but why did it take 5 years to say it?" A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Henderson walked in with a box of cookies and a soft smile. "I saw the press conference," she said gently. "That man, he truly regrets it. Are you going to forgive him?" Evelyn shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, Mrs. Henderson. I want to believe him, but I'm scared. What if I open my heart again and everything falls apart all over?" Mrs. Henderson squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Evelyn. And those boys? They deserve both a mother and a father. Maybe not today, but someday." She left, leaving Evelyn alone with her tangled thoughts. She glanced over at Liam, who shouted in frustration when his tower toppled, and Lucas, who quietly rebuilt it with calm determination. She remembered Lucas whispering in his sleep, "Mr. Julian tells good stories." They liked him, and no matter how hard she tried to deny it, Julian had brought joy into their lives. She opened her phone, scrolling through the trending topic number, Julian Ashford. The narrative had shifted. People were praising his honesty. It takes courage to admit failure on that level. Evelyn Moore is a hero, raising 2 boys on her own. She deserves better. But the cruel voices remained. Just a billionaire PR stunt. Evelyn closed the app. She didn't want more opinions. She needed clarity. That afternoon, Julian returned to Brook Hollow. He didn't call ahead. But when Evelyn opened the door to her sewing shop and saw him standing there, she wasn't surprised. He looked exhausted, but there was a steady light in his eyes. Something different, something stronger. "I kept my promise," he said softly. "Now I'm here to listen." What do you want, Evelyn? I'll do whatever it takes to make you and the boys feel safe. Evelyn stared at him, her heart in turmoil. She wanted to push him away, to keep things simple and safe, but his words from the press conference echoed in her mind. I need time, Julian, she said, her voice trembling. Not because I don't believe you, but because I need to be sure, for Liam and Lucas. Julian nodded, a sad smile tugging at his lips. I'll wait, as long as it takes. He turned to leave but paused at the door. I'll be at the park this evening. If you and the boys want to play, no pressure. Evelyn closed the door behind him and leaned against the wall. She didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him, but for the first time in 5 years, a sliver of hope stirred inside her. She looked out the window, watching soft snowflakes fall over Brook Hollow. Just one small step, she thought, for the boys. At the park, Liam and Lucas ran to Julian the moment they spotted him, blissfully unaware of scandals and past betrayals. Mr. Julian, let's play soccer, Liam shouted, pulling him toward the field. Lucas, quieter, approached with a drawing of a sparrow. For you, he said shyly, cheeks pink from the cold. Julian knelt down, taking the picture gently, his heart swelling. Thank you, Lucas. I'll keep it forever. He looked up and saw Evelyn across the field, her expression softer than before. No promises, no guarantees. But maybe, just maybe, he was finally on the right path. Brook Hollow shimmered in the silver light of winter, tiny snowflakes clinging to the bare branches. Inside a small apartment above the bakery, Evelyn Moore watched Liam and Lucas playing with wooden blocks on the rug. It had been 2 weeks since Julian's public apology, and while the town had quietly returned to normal, Evelyn's heart was far from settled. Julian's televised confession, the sincerity in his eyes when he played with their sons, and the way the townspeople now referred to him as a good man, it was all becoming harder to deny. Julian was changing, and more importantly, her sons needed him. Today was the preschool's annual appreciation picnic, a joyful event celebrating the parents' help during the recent fundraiser. Evelyn had agreed to let Julian attend, as Mr. Julian. But as she wrapped Lucas's scarf, he looked up and asked, Mommy, why does Mr. Julian come to play with us so much? Is he... He paused, his amber eyes gleaming with curiosity. Nearby, Liam skipped over, chiming in. Is he our dad? My friend said dads play soccer with you. Evelyn froze, her hands trembling just slightly. She had postponed this moment for so long, afraid the truth would shake their tiny world. But now, looking into Liam's bright eyes and Lucas's thoughtful gaze, she knew she couldn't hide it forever. She knelt down and pulled them both into her arms. My loves, she said gently but firmly, there's something I need to tell you. Mr. Julian is your dad. Liam gasped, then broke into a beaming grin. Really? Dad tells great stories. Lucas, quieter, clutched her hand, his voice softer. Why hasn't he been with us, Mommy? The question pierced her, but she smiled through it, brushing his hair back. Because Daddy and I had a big misunderstanding, but he loves you very much, and now he wants to be here. Would you give him a chance? Liam nodded so hard his curls bounced. Lucas paused, thinking, then whispered, I want to. Evelyn hugged them tight, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. This choice hadn't been easy, but she couldn't let her own pain steal the chance for her boys to know their father. Brook Hollow Park bustled with laughter, the scent of grilled hot dogs floating on the crisp air. Families spread picnic blankets on the grass, kids ran around with balloons, and a local folk band played cheerful tunes. Julian arrived early with a basket of sandwiches and apple juice, dressed in a sweater and jeans. No trace of Manhattan's billionaire. He spotted Evelyn and the boys arriving and waved, his heart thudding. He didn't know that today would change everything. Liam! Lucas! Come here! He called, holding up a soccer ball. Liam dashed toward him. Mr. Julian kicked the ball, hard. But then he paused, glanced at Evelyn, and turned back with a dazzling smile. Dad, Julian, play soccer with me. Lucas approached quietly, taking Julian's hand. Dad, will you tell us a story tonight? Julian froze, eyes wide. That word, Dad, fell from their mouths like a miracle. Sweet, shattering. He dropped to his knees and pulled both boys into his arms, his voice breaking as tears welled. Yes, he whispered. Yes, I'll tell stories. I'll play soccer. I'll do everything with you. Liam giggled and hugged his neck. Lucas rested his head on Julian's shoulder, a rare smile blooming on his lips. Evelyn stood a few steps away, hand on her chest, watching it all unfold. She had feared this moment, feared it would reopen wounds she had spent years burying, but seeing Julian hold their children, his tears real, she felt something inside her begin to soften. The past shouldn't punish the boys, she thought. She stepped closer, and when Julian looked up, she gave him a cautious but genuine smile. Thank you, he said hoarsely, wiping his face as the boys ran off to play. Thank you for telling them. She nodded. I did it for Liam and Lucas. They deserve a father. But Julian, I'm still not ready. Not for us. He accepted it, his gaze steady. I understand. I'll wait, Evelyn. As long as it takes. He turned and ran off after the boys, their laughter echoing across the park. Evelyn remained where she was, the weight on her chest finally lifting. She hadn't forgiven him fully, but she'd opened a door. Just enough for a sliver of light to shine through. The picnic continued with music and games. The townspeople, once wary of Julian, now smiled when they saw him. Mrs. Henderson leaned over and whispered, He looks happiest when he's with those kids. You made the right call. Mr. Tom, the bookseller, clapped Julian on the back and chuckled. You're doing great, Dad Julian. Julian flushed, but the smile on his face didn't fade. As the sun dipped lower, Liam tugged Julian toward the small stage where children were invited to give thank you speeches. Grabbing the mic with excitement, Liam shouted, Thank you, Mommy, because you're awesome. And thank you, Dad Julian, for playing soccer with me. The crowd burst into laughter and applause. Lucas stepped up, hesitant, and whispered into the mic, Thank you, Dad, for keeping my sparrow drawing. Julian stood frozen, tears in his eyes once more. He looked out into the crowd and found Evelyn, her eyes glistening, her hands clapping slowly. She smiled, this time without fear. In that moment, Julian knew that while the road ahead might be long, they were finally walking towards something real. That night, Evelyn sat beside her son's bed, reading their usual bedtime story. When she closed the book, Liam yawned and said, Mommy, I like when Daddy's here. He makes the dinosaur funny. Lucas nodded, clutching his stuffed animal. He still has my drawing. I'm glad. Evelyn kissed them both on the forehead, her heart warm. She stepped out onto the balcony, watching the snow fall gently over Brook Hollow. She wasn't ready to open her heart completely, but for the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel alone. Maybe, she thought, just maybe one day, we'll be a family. Brook Hollow glowed under Christmas lights, strings of warm bulbs wrapped around the tall pine tree in the town square. Snow drifted gently from the sky, blanketing wooden rooftops in soft white, while the scent of gingerbread wafted up from the bakery beneath Evelyn Moore's apartment. It had been a year since Julian Ashford walked into her sewing shop, bringing pain, hope, and eventually healing. Now he was an irreplaceable part of Liam and Lucas's lives, and though she had once fought it, hers too. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, rolling out cookie dough with Liam and Lucas. The three of them laughed as Liam ended up with flour all over his face. Julian, now a seasoned cookie cutter after months of practice, stood beside them, teasing Lucas as the boy carefully sprinkled sugar on each shape. You sure the sparrows like these cookies? Julian asked with a wink. Lucas nodded solemnly. Definitely, Daddy. Sparrows like sweet things. The word Daddy still melted Julian's heart, even after hearing it 100 times. He looked at Evelyn, brushing flour off Liam's cheek, and felt a quiet joy settle deep inside him. She hadn't said yes to his proposal, yet. I need time, she had told him, and he respected that. But tonight, under the warmth of Christmas, he hoped that might change. The Brook Hollow Preschool Christmas program was held in the cozy community hall, lit with soft candlelight and anchored by a giant, glittering tree. Children performed songs, parents applauded, and the scent of hot chocolate drifted from the refreshment table. Evelyn sat in the front row, Julian beside her, both watching Liam and Lucas on stage in their toy soldier costumes. When Liam stumbled over a line and Lucas whispered a quiet correction, the crowd chuckled warmly. Evelyn gripped Julian's hand, eyes sparkling. After the play, children were invited on stage to share their Christmas wishes. Liam grabbed the microphone and shouted, "I wish for a real dinosaur." Laughter filled the room. Lucas, a little more reserved, spoke into the mic softly, "I wish our family stays together forever." Evelyn's grip on Julian's hand tightened, tears pooling in her eyes. Lucas had always been the sensitive one. His quiet heart carried more worries than he let on. As the boys returned to their seats, Liam suddenly darted back on stage, clutching the mic with a mischievous grin. "Mommy, I think you should marry Daddy." The crowd erupted, laughter, gasps, and a few playful whistles. Evelyn blushed, covering her mouth in surprise and laughter. Julian stood slowly, his eyes bright. He climbed the stage steps and knelt before her, right as snowflakes began falling outside the open windows. "Evelyn," he said, his voice deep but clear across the hushed room, "I lost you once, because of my pride, my fear, and my mistakes. But you gave me a second chance, and I promise, for the rest of my life, to love and protect you, Liam and Lucas. Will you marry me?" He opened the ring box, a simple silver band with a small sapphire, the color of her eyes. Nothing flashy, just right. Evelyn looked at him, then at their boys, both bouncing with excitement and yelling, "Say yes, Mommy." She laughed through her tears and nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Julian slid the ring onto her finger, stood, and pulled her into his arms. The room burst into applause. Liam and Lucas charged forward, turning the hug into a family embrace, four hearts tangled in love under the twinkling Christmas lights. The next day brought another unexpected gift. Julian received a call from his mother, Victoria Ashford, the first contact since the press conference months ago. "My son," she said, her voice softer than he remembered. "I'd like to meet the boys. I was wrong about Evelyn, about everything." Julian was stunned, but invited her to Brook Hollow. That afternoon, Victoria arrived not in a limousine or with an entourage, but driving a rented sedan alone. She entered Evelyn's apartment with a sharp but softened gaze. Liam and Lucas rushed toward her. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Liam asked, holding up a toy. Lucas shyly offered a drawing. "This is for you." Victoria, the once stern matriarch of Ashford Media, sat down and pulled both boys into a gentle hug. "I love dinosaurs," she said to Liam, then to Lucas, "and this is the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen." She looked up at Evelyn, eyes no longer cold. "Ms. Moore, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to see you as a threat. You're a wonderful mother, and I hope we can start again." Evelyn, cautious but gracious, nodded. "For Liam and Lucas," she said. Julian stood by her side, taking her hand. He felt something heavy lift from his shoulders. Victoria spent the afternoon playing with the boys, telling them stories from her youth. When it was time to leave, she hugged Julian tightly. "You made the right choice," she whispered. "Hold on to them." That night, Christmas Eve blanketed Brook Hollow in pure white. Evelyn and Julian sat by the window watching the snow fall. Liam and Lucas lay asleep on the sofa, each curled around a stuffed animal. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow. Evelyn leaned into Julian, her ring catching the light. "You did it," she murmured. "You gave us a family." Julian kissed her forehead. "No, I just tried to keep up. You're the one who made us whole." He pulled her closer, and they sat there in silence, wrapped in warmth and love found after loss.